I never imagined that moving to Ashwood Lane would become the turning point of my life. At 28, I was desperate for a fresh start, far away from the relentless noise and betrayals of the city. Millfield was supposed to be my sanctuary, a quiet, sleepy town tucked away in rural America, where the streets whispered of safety and the faces were friendly. Or at least, that's what I hoped. The Victorian house I'd bought was no mansion, but it held a charm in its creaky floors and peeling paint, promising a new beginning if I was willing to embrace its flaws. The first days blurred into one another, unpacking boxes filled with memories I wanted to leave behind, learning the rhythm of the town's slow heartbeat, and meeting neighbors who offered polite nods but guarded smiles. There was a peculiar energy here, like the surface of a still pond hiding dark currents beneath. I tried to convince myself that my unease was just adjustment jitters. But then there was Mr. Callahan. Two houses down, the old man with the permanent scowl and piercing eyes that seemed to see right through me. He didn't welcome me. No friendly wave, no offer to help carry my boxes inside. Just silence, heavy and watchful. His presence was like a shadow cast long over the lane. One chilly evening, as I was returning from a late grocery run, I found a folded note tucked under my welcome mat. My breath caught when I read the three words scrawled inside: "We're watching you." No signature, no explanation. Just those words, sharp and chilling. Fear knotted in my stomach. Who would do this? I looked up and down the empty street, the streetlights casting long shadows, but revealing no one. My hands trembled as I stuffed the note into my coat pocket and double-locked the door behind me. The next morning, the weight of that message pressed on me. Mr. Callahan was already outside, pruning his withered rose bushes, but this time his scowl deepened as our eyes met. I forced a polite nod, but he didn't return it. I spent the day researching the house's history, hoping to find a rational explanation. The town library was a quaint building, its walls lined with dusty books and yellowed newspapers. There, hidden among the brittle archives, I discovered a faded article about a young woman named Evelyn Harper, who had vanished from Ashwood Lane decades ago. The report hinted at foul play, but no culprit was ever named. Curiosity morphed into obsession. The more I dug, the more I sensed a tapestry of secrets woven into the town's fabric. Secrets that residents preferred to keep buried. Whispers floated in the air when I walked past neighbors' homes, eyes darting away when I met their gaze. At night, strange sounds echoed through the silence. Muffled voices from Mr. Callahan's house, footsteps in the yard when no one should be there. I began leaving my lights on all night, clutching a kitchen knife beside the bed. When I finally confided in the local sheriff, he chuckled dismissively. "Kids playing pranks," he said. But I knew it wasn't that simple. Determined not to be intimidated, I continued my research. It became clear that Ashwood Lane was more than just a street. It was a crucible of betrayal, lies, and a tragedy that had shaped Millfield in silence. And somehow, I was right at the heart of it. The morning light filtered through my cracked curtains, but sleep had eluded me. Every shadow in the old Victorian house seemed alive, whispering warnings I couldn't ignore. My hands still trembled from the note, and the memory of Mr. Callahan's cold eyes haunted me. Who was he really? Why was he so invested in keeping me away? I dressed slowly, the chill in the air crawling under my skin. Outside, Ashwood Lane wore its usual calm mask, but beneath that calm lurked something sinister, and I felt it pressing closer. I brewed a strong cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, determined to find answers. I returned to the library, where the scent of old paper and polished wood comforted me. Sarah, the young librarian with sharp eyes and an open smile, greeted me warmly. She was one of the few who treated me like a person rather than a curiosity. I told her about the note and the strange atmosphere hanging over the neighborhood. She listened intently, her expression growing serious. When I showed her the clipping about Evelyn Harper, her voice dropped to a whisper. "That case never sat right with me," Sarah said. "People stopped talking about it too quickly. And Mr. Callahan? He was around back then, too." Her words sent a fresh chill down my spine. We spent hours poring over dusty files and town records. The pieces slowly formed a dark mosaic. Evelyn had been a bright young woman, outspoken and unafraid to question the town's powerful. But shortly before her disappearance, she'd hinted at knowing things that could destroy reputations. Sarah pulled out an old map of Millfield. Ashwood Lane was marked prominently. "There are stories," she said, "about what goes on behind closed doors here. Deals made, truths buried. And Mr. Callahan? He's said to be the one pulling the strings." I realized I wasn't just dealing with a creepy neighbor. I was facing a man whose reach extended far beyond the visible. Someone who'd shaped this town's fate with secrets and intimidation. That evening, returning home, I noticed subtle changes. The air felt heavier. The windows of neighboring houses were shuttered earlier than usual. And as I reached my porch, a figure stood waiting. Mr. Callahan. He didn't speak, just stared. His presence was suffocating. When I met his gaze, a slow, almost imperceptible smile curled his lips. It was a warning. Stop now, or face the consequences. But I had crossed the line. Determined, I returned inside, locking the door behind me. I knew I couldn't do this alone. The town's silence was a wall, but I was ready to tear it down, piece by piece. The next morning, I woke with a resolve as sharp as the autumn air outside. The shadows that clung to Ashwood Lane would not keep me silent. But the deeper I dug, the more I understood how tangled the web was, and how dangerous unraveling it could become. Sarah and I agreed that to truly understand Evelyn's story, we needed more than newspaper clippings and town records. We began seeking out the few older residents who might remember the truth. One name came up again and again: Margaret Ellis, the town's unofficial historian and recluse. I found Margaret's cottage on the edge of Millfield, a quaint structure overrun with ivy and memories. Her eyes, sharp beneath silver hair, betrayed decades of guarded secrets. "You're the one stirring the past," she said the moment I introduced myself. "Millfield doesn't forgive easily." I explained my connection to the old Harper house and my growing fears. Margaret sighed, then shared what no one else dared voice aloud. Evelyn wasn't just lost to the town. She was silenced. Mr. Callahan and his allies feared what she knew: the skeletons in their closets. Her disappearance wasn't an accident. Her words confirmed my worst suspicions. The powerful had woven a cloak of fear around Millfield, and I was now a target beneath it. Back home, the atmosphere shifted. Neighbors avoided my gaze more openly. The whispers followed me through grocery aisles. The note's threat was no longer a lone warning. It was a promise. Then came the night I heard voices outside my bedroom window. Low and urgent, muffled but unmistakably there. I peered through the curtains and saw Mr. Callahan speaking with two men I'd never seen before. Their conversation was sharp, laced with threats I couldn't fully hear, but the intent was clear. Fear knotted my stomach, but it also hardened my determination. Evelyn's fight was now mine. With Sarah's help, I began compiling evidence: diary entries, witness accounts, and fragments of truth pieced together from decades-old secrets. We knew exposing Mr. Callahan would shake Millfield to its core. But I was ready, because some darkness demanded light, and some revenge needed patience. The days that followed were a delicate dance between fear and resolve. Every step I took on Ashwood Lane felt like walking a tightrope stretched over a deep, dark chasm. I knew that one wrong move could send me plummeting into silence. But I refused to let the shadows win. Sarah and I deepened our investigation, methodically piecing together the threads of a story the town had desperately tried to erase. The diary entries from Evelyn, revealed not just a victim's tale, but the intricate workings of a man who wielded power through manipulation and fear. We discovered that Mr. Callahan was more than just an old neighbor. He was a figure enmeshed in the town's history, a patriarch whose influence reached into the police department, local businesses, and even the town council. The corruption ran deeper than I had imagined. One afternoon, while sifting through musty documents in the library's basement, I felt a sudden chill. The lights flickered, and a heavy silence fell over the room. I glanced toward the doorway, and there, standing in the shadows, was a man I hadn't seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn leather jacket, his eyes sharp and unreadable. "I wouldn't go any further if I were you," he said quietly, his voice low but commanding. "Some things in Millfield are better left alone." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" He gave a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Call me a concerned citizen." Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the labyrinth of shelves. My heart hammered. The threat was unmistakable. That night, as I locked up the house, I found a plastic bag hanging from my front door handle. Inside was a small rusted key and a note. "The truth lies beneath." My mind raced. Beneath what? The house? The town? Fueled by a mix of dread and determination, Sarah and I decided to explore the basement, a place I'd avoided since moving in. The stale air and shadows seemed to welcome us into secrets long buried. Behind a loose panel in the back wall, we found a small metal box locked tight. The rusted key fit perfectly. Inside were faded photographs, letters, and documents, evidence of blackmail, threats, and manipulated fates. Among them was a letter written by Evelyn on the day she disappeared. It was a confession and a warning, a promise to expose the truth no matter the cost. Suddenly, the past surged forward, no longer distant history, but a living, breathing force, and I was caught in its grip. Just as I reached for the documents, a sharp knock echoed through the basement door. My blood ran cold. "We need to move. Now." The quiet revenge I had envisioned was about to become a battle, one that would demand every ounce of courage I had. The rusted key still weighed heavy in my hand as Sarah and I hurriedly packed the documents into a small satchel. The knock on the basement door wasn't just a warning, it was a countdown. Someone knew exactly what we were doing, and they wanted to stop us. We slipped out of the basement, hearts pounding, every creak of the floorboards amplified in the thick silence. Upstairs, the house felt colder, shadows twisting unnaturally in the dim light. I locked the basement door behind us and slid the bolt across with trembling fingers. Sarah whispered, "We need to get this to the sheriff. If the police department's compromised, he needs to see this. Proof." I nodded. The drive to the sheriff's office was tense. Every passing car felt like it might be following us. The streets of Millfield were unusually empty for a weekday evening, the streetlights flickering like nervous eyes watching our every move. At the sheriff's station, we were met with cautious eyes. The sheriff listened silently as we laid out the evidence. His expression shifted from skepticism to grim resolve. "This changes everything," he finally said. "If Callahan's been pulling strings this long, it's going to shake the town to its core." Days passed in a blur of meetings, interviews, and sleepless nights. Rumors swirled. The town's carefully constructed silence began to crack, replaced by whispers of outrage and fear. Mr. Callahan's allies mobilized, trying to discredit us, painting Evelyn as troublemaker and me as an outsider stirring unrest. But the evidence was undeniable. Calls were made, warrants were signed. Then came the night I'd feared most. A loud crash shattered the silence. Flames licked the edges of my front porch. Smoke curled into the night sky, thick and suffocating. Someone was sending a message. I stood on the sidewalk, watching my home burn, the heat searing my skin. But inside, a fire ignited that no smoke could extinguish. I wasn't backing down. The battle for Ashwood Lane was just beginning. And this time, I wasn't alone. The fire that devoured my porch was the loudest declaration I'd ever received. They were terrified. But instead of breaking me, it fueled a fierce determination I hadn't known I possessed. The sheriff's office doubled down. Police patrols increased, and the town buzzed with unease. Mr. Callahan's carefully maintained empire began to crumble as more victims found courage to speak, shedding light on decades of manipulation and fear. Sarah and I worked tirelessly, connecting the dots between whispered rumors and cold, hard facts. The community's walls of silence cracked, revealing scars beneath the surface. One afternoon, as I sat in the sheriff's office reviewing evidence, the door opened. Mr. Callahan himself walked in, no longer masked by menace but exposed. A man cornered by his own deeds. His voice was low, a mixture of rage and resignation. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Justice isn't a game. It's long overdue." Soon after, Callahan was arrested, charged with obstruction, intimidation, and suspected involvement in Evelyn's disappearance. Well, the town began the slow, painful process of healing. Ashwood Lane was no longer a place of fear. It became a symbol of courage, of a quiet revenge that spoke louder than any threat. Sitting on my porch, the night air cool against my skin, I realized how far I'd come. From outsider to townsperson, from frightened victim to the woman who refused to be silenced. And as the stars shimmered above Millfield, I knew one truth remained. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply surviving and shining a light on the darkness.